It was at Princeton University's baccalaureate service. And I think it was 2010. Jeff Bezos was there speaking. He's the founder of Amazon. As he was talking to the students there, he told a story from his life. A story that really hits home, I think, to the nature of somewhat where we need to go today. He was talking about when he was growing up. His grandparents had a ranch in Texas, and he would go spend the summer there with them. And it was probably about his 10th year of his life. He was hanging out with them, and every once in a while, they would go in one of those old Airstream camper things that would go across the country, where the people put these trailers on the back of their cars and do caravans around the nation. And so his grandparents that summer were going on one, and he jumped in the car with them, and they took off with the Airstream and started to travel across with probably about 300 other Airstream trailers. And as they were moving, Jeff would find himself always working math. He loved math. He was always working out different calculations on everything so he could begin to understand how much gas mileage and everything else. He had learned somewhere that for every puff of smoke somebody takes on a cigarette, they lose so many minutes on their life. He actually thought it was probably about 2 minutes that he had heard. His grandmother was a smoker, and so as she's smoking in the car, as they're driving, he starts calculating that basically you lose for every puff of smoke that you take on a cigarette, you lose 2 minutes of your life. So as he calculated, he, feeling very, very clever, says to his grandmom, "Hey, grandmom, do you know that I just figured it out that you probably have lost about 9 years of your life?" And he was waiting for her to go, "Wow, you are just amazing math whiz. How do you do all that?" But instead, she started to cry. Started to cry a lot. He had never heard her cry before. His grandfather pulled the car over out of the Airstream and sat down on the side of the road while the rest of the caravan continued to go by. He got out of the car, and he'd never seen his grandfather mad, and he couldn't tell whether his grandfather was mad or not, and he came around and he got Jeff out, and they went back beside the Airstream, and his grandfather said these words to him. He didn't know whether he was going to get hit. He didn't know what was going to happen. He just never seen his grandfather quite like this. His grandfather got down on a knee, looked him right in the eye, and he said, "Jeff, one day you'll learn that it's harder to be kind than it is to be clever." You know, it's interesting, but that moment in his life where he heard and understood that phrase, he realized that all of the things he was good at, all of the things he was able to do, all the things that kind of made him who he thought he was at that moment were overshadowed by his, what we call shadow. And he realized at that moment that if he was ever going to become something, he was going to have to come out of the shadow that he was in. And he'd have to be a man that would live a little bit differently. At the age of 10, he began to think differently about his giftedness. Guys, we are doing a trail today that I think is so essential if we're going to understand who we are. It's on our dog tags. It's on the 6 parts of the core. It's about the shadow. And it's this part that we're going to have to prioritize our battles. If you're going to do anything in your existence, the trail that we're on called Prioritize Your Battles, the battle is about the shadow. Because if you don't deal with this one internally and ever come out from it, it will so drive who you are. It'll so make you into something you don't want to be that you will never know the freedom that you were designed to do. The choice that you get to make in letting your core be what it's designed to be will be connected to how well you fight this battle, how well you prioritize it. Take a look at this phrase in here that I think is so key. It says this, in your trail number 5. The first battle a warrior must fight takes place inside himself. He must fight against the shadow's involvement with his core. You and I need to know that we have to fight this battle that's deep within ourselves. It's this battle deep within our very existence. And if we don't fight this battle deep within us, if you don't go to this battle at the heart of your core, you're going to be messed up. Look at the rest of the phrase. The shadow's goal is to destroy. What the shadow wants to do is destroy. It wants to destroy you. It wants to destroy those around you. It wants to destroy people that not only are your enemies, but also people that are your friends. The very nature of the shadow is destruction. So, and it's inside of you. It's inside. It exists within you. And so when you look at the core of who you are, because of what we talked about yesterday, remember we said how that part of you, the spirit died and the shadow came in? That shadow is destructive. The shadow is what gives death. And when we refer to the shadow, you think we refer to it as almost like it's a person. That's because it is. There's a being called Satan that represents the shadow. It's the source of the shadow on earth. And that being has offered it and planted it because of our choice within us all. Now, God didn't want us to live according to the shadow. He wanted to live in freedom. There's a story in your nightly news. You'll notice your nightly news there is a story of a man by the name of Aaron. Aaron is actually the brother of Moses. Moses, as you know, is that great leader of the nation of Israel that took him out of Egypt, if you know the story. That's the Red Sea crossing with the dry land stuff and the plagues and all that. Well, Moses had this brother, that Aaron, that he brought along with him because Moses didn't feel he could speak well. He didn't feel he could represent God well. So when he brought Aaron with him, he decided that the best thing he could do is to entrust certain things to Aaron. And what he decided to do, he started to entrust some areas for him that allowed him to take care of the people when Moses would be gone. Aaron becomes what is known as the high priest in the nation of Israel. Moses is up on a mountain with God. Moses is at a place where his shadow is really, for the most part, way overshadowed by the presence of God. Now, his shadow is still in Moses, but, man, the glory of God's just pouring out of Moses as Moses is getting what we call the Ten Commandments. While he's gone so long that the people of Israel think he's dead. So they go to Aaron, the guy who's supposed to help Moses, and say, we need a God to follow here. So Aaron takes all their gold, puts it in a pot, melts it, and makes a golden calf, and they worship it. I mean, they have this wild, pagan, old-time Egyptian kind of behavior thing going on at the base of the mountain where God is speaking the Ten Commandments into Moses' life. As Moses hears this rumble, God actually talks about it, says there's something going on in the camp. He comes down the mountain, and he sees this unbelievable carnage of just so much of the shadow coming out of the shadows and just living in the evilness of itself. Because when the shadow's left to run rampant, it does destructive things. As he sees this happening, he stares in disbelief, and he throws the Ten Commandments down the ground and shatters them into pieces because that shadow just wants it hidden so bad. He gets down to Aaron, he goes, what in the world happened? He goes, you know how the people are. Aaron said, it was the people's fault. They made me do it. As a matter of fact, they were pushing me so hard. I said, give me your gold. I threw it in a pot, and out came this golden calf. No golden calf came out. He formed it. Aaron's a man that was interesting. He was given a task of making a difference in the presence of God, and he let his shadow dominate. If you don't win this battle, if you don't prioritize this particular battle in your life, you will do a whole bunch of stuff outside that you think is clever, but it's not kind. Let's walk through some of the issues of the shadow that we have to deal with that I think will free us up. Roman number 1, the shadow limits the warrior's ultimate strength by. The whole thing is to not just make you destructive, but it's to limit your strength. It's going to limit your strength by the following areas. There's a number of areas we want to go through. Look at number 1. The first thing that limits the strength. By denying that problems exist that would call for his active intervention. If I can get you to be complacent, if I can get you to deny that a problem exists, if I can get you to not care. Have you ever noticed that there are days when there are things going on all around you, not just in the world in a big picture, but in a very small world around you, and you just don't care? It's the shadow's job is to say, doesn't matter. Just eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow you die. That's the nation of Israel. In the plain below the mountain, it is what you and I do as a way of life. And look at number 2, if we let the shadow dominate. The shadow is going to suggesting temporary, easier, more partial solutions. If you do get involved, you're going to get involved in a less full way, okay? A more temporary, a more partial solution. The shadow is saying, I'm going to zap your strength. I'm going to take what you're designed to be. And by the way, you're going to need to fight against the shadow, but you're not going to be able to beat it single-handedly. We've talked about that, and we'll talk about that some more today. But the shadow, what it's trying to do is cause you to say, you know what? At best, I'll do a half of a job. I won't give the full effort. I'll get as much as I can. When I was in school, my whole goal was just to get out of school So it wasn't to get an A, it was just to pass. What the shadow's driving me to do is that which is partial, that which isn't full. It does something else that's very destructive. Look at number 3. Emphasizing the pain and likely disappointment, pessimism, of trying hard and not completely succeeding. Perfectionism. You write those 2 words down. Pessimism, which is that desire to say, you know what, no matter what I try, it's not going to work. And perfectionism, which says, you know what, if I don't completely succeed, I'm not going to be happy. Do you know what the great struggle that a man has? He wonders if he's enough. Have you ever wondered about that as a man? Am I enough? Am I enough sexually? Am I enough as a leader? Am I enough in this? And am I enough in that? We're always wondering, am I enough? Because we compare ourselves, right? My father was a man that, as his life degenerated over a period of time, he was very pessimistic about who he could be. In fact, the older he got, the greater this became. And then he was a perfectionist throughout his life. So he was never enough, and he never believed he could be enough. That's the shadow. It's the shadow's job all the time to convince you that what God made won't work. That the core of who you are is so dominated by this one area, this shadow that you need to get out from, that the rest of your core just degenerates. You never become what you were designed to be. Look at the next one. It says, the ultimate strength of a warrior is knocked out by number 4, suggesting he quit prematurely when it gets rough. Guys, I want you to know that the whole idea of quitting is what the shadow's about. You are designed not to lose. You're actually designed to win. You and I are actually at a place in our life where we are supposed to be victorious. And I don't mean like you beat the opponent win. I mean do what you were designed to do. Hit the ultimate of who you've been created to be as a knight, as a warrior. And the shadow says, guess what? You're a loser. You're going to quit because you can't win. It drives us to that. It takes all the strength out of a man. Look at number 5. Trying to convince him that it's someone else's problem. One of the great things we'll say, it's somebody else's fault. He did it. It's his fault. It's not my fault. If I can excuse what I do based off of my history growing up, or what my parents did. Now, what your parents did affects you. We'll talk about that in week 18, 19, 20, and 21. The reality is that's true, but the concept that you have to understand is that when we say it's not my fault, that's the shadow speaking. Guys, at the bottom of your core is a choice that yourself will make. You make choices. You can't blame it on somebody else. It's your choice. And when you do that, you have to say, okay, what am I doing? What am I creating? See, sometimes the shadow is driving us just to say, it's somebody else's problem. Number 6, creating internal conflicts and encouraging imbalanced behavior. If I can get you out of balance, I can knock you over. When you are imbalanced, you know, anybody in sports will tell you about that. If I can encourage you into imbalanced behavior, then all I have to do is knock you over. It's easy. If you're balanced, it's harder. Everything's throwing us off our game. Ever notice that we tend to go to extremes? Right? We either get to this point where we drink too much, and then all of a sudden our behavior becomes imbalanced. Or now I won't drink at all because my behavior gets imbalanced. You know how we always tend to go bang, 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 bang? Now sometimes when you're an alcoholic, you got to stop drinking. Sometimes when you're addicted to gambling, you just got to never, ever buy a lottery ticket. But here's our problem. Our problem is that we are so extreme-oriented that we constantly find ourselves out of balance. Let's take it in a positive way. If balance is to love one woman and love only that one woman and love her well, then out of balance is you toy on the other sides until ultimately you become an adulterer and ultimately you become a user. And that's the way it works. That's the shadow driving you all the time to that. Look at number 7. The shadow is going to drive us to our strength away by supporting an isolation mentality. You know, the whole idea of being isolated. When you write that word isolation down, I want you to understand that that is sort of the natural way men go. We tend to go it alone. We tend to say, I don't need no stinking campfire. I can do this on my own. Yeah, you do need a campfire. See, if you're ever going to come out of that shadow, if you're ever going to get free from there, you're probably not going to do it alone. Number 1, you're not going to do it without God. You can try, but you're not going to do it without God. And 2, you're probably not going to do it without men encouraging you up. See, isolation, the shadow drives you. You ever think about this? When we sin, we tend to sin all alone. In our darkness, we tend to sin on the other side of the tunnel, right? Where nobody can see us. Because when you do what's wrong, when you do those things that you know are improper, you don't want to do it in a crowd. And a couple trails from now, we're going to be talking about the kryptonite of a male, which is sexuality. And when we talk about it, we'll talk about masturbation. And one of the things about masturbation is we tend to do that in the quietness, in the hidden area. Why do we do it there? Because in our minds, we're thinking about someone improperly. It gets really, really tricky. We tend to sin in the darkness. Now, we're going to talk about masturbation, and it's not necessarily a right or wrong concept. It's really just what you do with it from the inside becomes everything, that which we hide in. What are you doing that's hiding things in you? What goes way down into the tunnel? What goes way hidden that nobody else knows about? Comments that you make about people that you don't put on Facebook. I can't even believe some of the things people put on Facebook. But the comments that you don't. Deep in the shadows, isolated, alone. That's the shadow's job, get you alone. And in aloneness is where you and I do the greatest amount of damage, both to us and then ultimately to those around us. We might be clever or not kind. Look at the next one. The next one says, bathing him, if his ultimate strength will be removed by bathing him in self-pity, number 8, or depressive thoughts. Self-pity or depressive thoughts. I think you guys know this. We have about 1,200 guys that take this material that you're taking right now, that we gather together in one location. Now, there's a whole bunch of you guys all over the country and around the world, but we have just a group of guys, about 1,200 guys at one location, at LCBC, the church where I am on staff at. One of our guys this past year had Lou Gehrig's disease. When the day I'm recording this, he's still alive, but he does not expect to be around this time next year. It's interesting. He's supposed to wallow in self-pity, but he doesn't. He's supposed to feel like his illness is debilitating, that it's all over. You know what? It is all over. Unless something miraculous takes place, he will lose his ability to breathe and will die. But I watch him. He doesn't let the shadow dominate. Some of you have illnesses. Some of you have financial situations, and they are debilitating to you. You can't move, and your illness is just that your blood sugar is just a tiny bit high. Your illness is that your toe is bothering you. Your illness is that your credit card debt is making it hard for you to stay up on your balances. See, be very careful that you understand that these things become overwhelming to us, and we start to just wallow in sort of this depression that the shadow loves to sell. Look at the next one. Number 9. The shadow limits the warrior's ultimate strength by seeking pleasure as a primary motivation for decision making. This is so important, guys. Pleasure is what the shadow's selling. Pleasure, along with power and popularity, but really for a guy, we're pretty base. It boils down to pleasure. Most things in life are pleasurable. It's pleasurable to eat, unless you eat too much. It's pleasurable to get rid of your food on most occasions. Every once in a while it's not, but for the most part, it's pleasurable to have sex. 7 seconds is really pleasurable, whatever it is for us. We have that pleasure. Things are pleasurable. There's nothing wrong with that. The problem is that we overindulge, right? We tend to overeat. What if things that were pleasurable were to become unpleasurable when we overdid them? Well, in reality, they are. But we keep doing them anyway, over and over again. Why? Shadows, driving. I don't know, I have never met a guy who loves a hangover. But I've met a lot of guys who've had hangovers more than once. Which means that the pleasure of whatever they thought was happening before the hangover gets overshadowed. Gets overshadowed, not by the hangover, but by the desire for more pleasure. That's the way it works. Look at number 10. The shadow limits the warrior's ultimate strength by choosing arrogance and a better-than attitude. No good knight does a comparison game. No good knight looks at another knight and says, I'm better than you. Not a good knight. In fact, every good knight looks at another knight and says, I need you. Every good knight looks at a guy who isn't a knight yet and says, need a rescue, right? You got to be very, very careful about this whole area. It's where you start to judge the character, the heart of a man. There's a movie that came out in the last few years. It's called Robin Hood, and this one was done with Russell Crowe. It's actually the story before Robin Hood becomes Robin Hood. It's actually as he is Robin Longstride. And Robin Longstride, he is just a normal warrior with this army. It's on a crusade. Richard the Lionhearted is the commander, the king, and they're all sort of following him on this crusade. In the middle of the night, the scene I want you to think about, it takes place. What's happening at that moment is that Robin is tricking some guys to get some food by playing a shell game. Little John comes up, thinks he's figured out the game, thinks that there is no pea hidden underneath the shells, but in reality there is one, and a fight ensues. The King of England has decided he wants to go out among his troops, and he's with Locksley, Sir Robert Locksley, who is his sort of second in command, a lord of a realm. And they go walking among to find an honest man. When he comes, this fight is taking place, and he grabs these men, breaks them apart, and he asks Robin Longstride, will you speak honestly with him? Because Robin Longstride said, I'm the one who started the fight. It's on me. Big John said, it was me. I'm the one who was also involved. And he goes, well, I got some honest men. Well, tell me honestly what you think of what's going on in our battle. You know what's interesting? All the other men you can tell saying, don't be honest with the king. Don't be honest with the king. But Robin, wanting to come out of the shadows, says, yes, sir, I'll be honest with you. What do you think of what's going on? He goes, well, I don't think that God is necessarily pleased. And the King of England says, what do you mean? He said, and he named a certain battle at a certain place when they had all these people that had been captured. He said, there was a woman in front of me, and you asked us to kill them. And as I looked up into the helplessness of their eyes, I realized that she looked at us, and she looked at me, just before I killed her, with pity. You know why? Because she knew that at that moment, we were godless. The next scene is Robin locked in stocks along with Little John and several other people that are all locked in there. And as they're all engaged in that moment and they're talking about it, Robin says, that's it. I'm done following the king. As that scene comes to an end, I think we're always amazed by what is it like for a man to be honest in a dishonest world. What's it like for a man to so come out of the shadows? And when Robin comes out of the shadows and he wants to be truthful, it's interesting that the world doesn't even respond well. You know why? Because I think for the most part the world likes the shadow more than truth. Let's look at what else the shadow does to us. Look at Roman numeral number 2. The shadow's attempt to disrupt the warrior's personal growth and knows that, okay, the shadow's going to attempt to disrupt your personal growth. It knows certain things about us, all right, that it wants to work. Now remember, the shadow is a being. It's an enemy that has now permeated these concepts within us. Look at number 1. A disintegration process followed by a reintegration process makes a warrior incredibly strong. I'm going to read that. That's a typical Roy thing. It was a much shorter sentence before he got done rewriting it here. A disintegration process followed by a reintegration process makes a warrior incredibly strong. What he wants to do, and this is what the shadow is working on all the time. Remember now, the shadow is trying to take your growth and knows that if you become stronger, you're dangerous. So the shadow has to fight against that. You know what's interesting? We avoid pain, right? Not a bad idea. But when you have pain, make it worth it. When something degenerates in you, use it to get stronger, to grow as a result of it. The shadow fights against it. Again, remember all the things we just talked about? All those things cause us to not want to respond well. Don't ever miss an opportunity to learn from pain. Whatever that pain is, emotional or economic or physical. Don't miss that opportunity. Look at number 2. A shadow attempts to disrupt a warrior's personal growth and knows that a knight not only helps himself but makes a difference in the world. Why is the shadow fighting against you so much? Because the shadow knows that you can make a difference. The enemy, the one who creates the shadow, knows that if you're let go and you start making choices to follow the Spirit as part of all that you are, you start to use every part of your core, your body and your soul and your mind and yourself to follow in the Spirit to make right choices. The shadow knows you're going to make a huge difference. So it's fighting against you at every level. Look at number 3. The shadow attempts to disrupt the warrior's personal growth and knows that a well-developed knight will manifest the will, self-discipline, and spiritual sensitivity to limit the shadow's influence. Imagine this, that you and I will limit the shadow's influence in us if we're let to run free and do what we were designed to be as opposed to what we've degenerated to be, spandex male versus knight. What the shadow knows is if he ever lets you get free, man, you're going to make a huge difference. And so what it wants to do is this. It wants to not be limited in our existence. And I think this is what we have to understand. We have an enemy that's opposing us. If you limit that enemy's influence, that enemy is going to get more intense. It's going to get trickier. Fighting the shadow, by the way, is not just done, although it's your priority battle and it happens within, the attacks sort of come without too. You know, the world, the flesh, and the devil are 3 phrases that the Bible uses. Those things are fighting against you all the time. Look at the next one. The shadow attempts to disrupt the warrior's personal growth and knows that positive relationships will be formed with others, fulfilling life's purpose. Positive relationships will be formed with others. The big question we need to ask is, who in the world do we hang out with? Right? What kind of relationships are you having? Are you having positive relationships? Are you hanging out with people that drive you to the shadow? Have you ever seen a college movie that's anything from PG-13 to R that they come out with about 4 a year? I call them college movies because it's everything that guys should not be engaged in as a way of life happening, and we're all watching it going, yeah, that's us, that's who guys are, that's what we are. Who you hang out with is who you become like. You and I are constantly making choices to hang around guys that act like spandex males and not act like knights. The shadow wants you to make that choice. You and I have to think about who it is that we hang out with. Look at the next one. The shadow attempts to disrupt the warrior's personal growth and knows that God is honored when the man allows his potential to reflect God's image within him as he pursues God's calling for his life. God's image, the reflection of God's image inside of us. The shadow is very much aware of the fact that if we reflect the image of God, it will speak to a world longing for God. And the shadow can't do that. Can't tolerate that. The enemy can't tolerate that. The world and its curse is in opposition to it. Remember, the forest fights against us. So what we need to understand is that there's a battle that engages when we go into this area. Consider the next one. There's another thing the shadow knows. The shadow attempts to disrupt the warrior's personal growth and knows that the knight will naturally, and here's a couple things that go with that, will naturally be a good example to children. I love this one. This is one of my favorite concepts. If you're a knight and you walk in a room, remember I talk about this, when a man enters a room, when a man leaves the shadows and enters a room, because if you enter the room in a shadow, everybody backs off. But if you enter a room free from your shadow, or having your shadow under control, because you're never completely free from it, as you have it under control, children will feel safe. You want to know how you're doing? Watch children's response. Now, I'm not talking about pedophiles. I'm not talking about people who have learned to con kids. That's a whole different world. I'm talking about the natural response. Children have this natural innocence that pedophiles take advantage of. One of the most horrible crimes I can possibly imagine. When you enter a room, though, as a knight, you should make a huge difference, and children should feel safe in your presence. Isn't that the coolest thing? That's what God naturally does. Look at the next thing it says. A knight will naturally love his wife. We make love to one woman for the rest of our lives. Whatever's happened before now, we change from now going forward. I will naturally love her. I will make her feel valuable. When I won't spend a lot of time cutting her down. Women despise it when we wound them like that. What we want to do is when we walk into a room, a woman should feel loved. Now, by the way, I believe any woman should feel loved when you walked in a room. The difference is one woman should be longed for and desired in your mate, and everybody else should feel safe and cared for and valued. Not clever, kind. Look at the next thing that happens. A knight will naturally mentor other males towards knighthood. You do not do this battle alone, right? But you don't do it alone waiting for guys to pull you along. You're never going to get out of the shadow if you wait for guys to pull you along. You have to look at guys and so value them and pull them along yourself. That's what a knight does. A knight becomes, and you'll see this as we walk through Oracle next year, which is the whole concept of the wisdom of a knight, the principles of a knight. Then we will walk through Round Table. Round Table is when a group of knights are working together as a unit to accomplish great things. By the time you get to defense, you're actually the knight where anybody behind you feels safe. Anybody who's underneath you, whether it's employees or whether it's a whole family clan, whatever it is, that you have that ability to build a safety net in Christ to make a difference in everybody's life. When you get to that level, man, well, that's just talking about that. You start mentoring. Another thing that you're going to do naturally is this. A knight naturally will produce a movement for a positive culture change. We change the forest doesn't change us. A positive culture change. The world should be different because you and I exist in it. That becomes really exciting. Look at number 7. On a daily basis, a knight actively seeks indications of the shadow's presence and utilizes various resources to deal with it. Self-reflection, prayer, confession, accountability, relationships, etc., etc. When my kids were growing up, I used to tell them a story. So as we consider this particular truth that you just wrote down, and there's a reflection that I wanted my kids to have. There's a story about a world called Wondra, and Wondra was a world where there was all kinds of enemies out, and the guys were knights, and they go off and explore all kinds of things. But whenever they were in trouble, I'd always tell them in Wondra, look for the light. When you find the light, head towards it, because the light in Wondra was always good. That's what this is all about. Look for the existence of one who doesn't have a shadow. That's God. That's Jesus Christ. Number 8. God offers a way of dealing with the underlying moral implications and negative influence of the shadow's existence. All right, this is what God has a way. He has a way of dealing with this shadow. Just so you know, God's offered a way for you out of the shadow. You want to get out of the tunnel, into the light, God's offered that way. Here's what he's done. This has all happened through Christ. This is basically, I'm going to give you a very quick statement of what we believe. You don't have to believe this. I'm just telling you I have no other way to get out of the shadow but this. I don't know how else to help you. The shadow of presence exists in all men. Apart from this, I don't know how to get you free. Right? So here's what we believe. Christ's death removed sin's barrier between God and mankind. Christ's death removes the barrier. Look at the second one. Walk as an example of Christ. Walk was an example of a shadow-free living. Christ will show you how to do what we're talking about. It's not theory. It was functioned in Christ. 3, Christ's forgiveness encouraged us to try again. I know you've messed up. I know in the darkness you've done things you don't want to talk about. Christ's forgiveness will allow you to move forward and try again to get free from the shadow. The next one. Christ's love inspires us to respond in kind to others. People should feel different when you walk in the room. Christ's love inspires kindness. It is easier to be clever than it is to be kind. Now, judgment. Christ's judgment taught us how to think wisely about the offerings of the forest. Christ will teach us not to get captivated by things in the forest that cannot satisfy us. I talk about a warrior every time. There was a warrior that was part of the Sioux Nation. His name is Sitting Bull. Sitting Bull is a very interesting man. Sitting Bull was a man that actually, in my opinion, came out of the shadows pretty well. Now, there's not a whole lot known about his spiritual journey. There's no indication that he got free in Christ, but there is some interesting indication that he fought against the shadow. Sitting Bull became the head of his tribe and was responsible for what took place at the battle with Custer. Sitting Bull brought 3 other parts of the Sioux Nation together, and those 4 tribes attacked Custer and beat him. What Sitting Bull was, though, he hated fighting. He hated war. If you push him in a corner, if you make him, he would fight, but he hated it. In fact, he would fight barehanded because he didn't think it was fair to use a weapon in destroying another opponent, and he also felt like if he destroyed another opponent without a weapon, they'd realize how powerful or how scary it was. Sitting Bull was always a man of high morality. He was picked actually as the head of his tribe when everybody else was trying to decide between him and one other guy. They did this little test and they would say, if we took your wife away, how would you react? They told this one guy this other man had stolen his wife, and that man tried to kill that other man. When the same thing was told of Sitting Bull, he went and got supplies for his wife and gave it to her so she would be cared for, because he thought in terms of her highest good. If she didn't love him, well, it must be somebody else. And for good for the tribe. And although morally, we sometimes in our culture question it, in their culture, that was a very high act of character. Sitting Bull cared about people. He actually became part of the Wild West show with Bill Hickok and Wild Bill Hickok, and he made a lot of money. And that day, $50 a week, and he gave it all away to people in need. He couldn't believe all the people struggling with alcohol, all the people struggling with a lot of junk in their lives as he would hit these towns and see white men doing certain things. But throughout his life, Sitting Bull found himself spending more and more time dealing with issues that were his nation being wounded by the white man. Sitting Bull decided that he would be a moral man throughout it all, but he would be a moral man with real conscience. And I have a sense that Sitting Bull tried to fight through his shadow. Listen to this quote by Sitting Bull regarding who he is, who his people is. I'll put it on the screen for you. It's this. Is it wrong for me to love my own? Is it wicked for me because my skin is red? Because I'm Sioux? Because I was born where my father lived? Because I would die for my people and my country? God made me an Indian. Here's a guy desperately trying to come out of his shadow and make a difference in the forest around him. It's an interesting part of this man as a warrior. Tremendous amount of respect for a man who gets this understanding and this clarity. Let me show you a couple things I think will help us understand what the shadow cannot do. Roman numeral 3. The shadow cannot defeat a warrior who wins the war against the shadow inside attack on him. If you win this war, then the other wars, prioritize your battles, the other wars will work out. This is so key. How are you going to win this war? It's going to have to be in Christ. I don't know any other way to do it. But you have to win this war. This is the war that you win. Now, does shadow ever go away? No. When I am tired, I'm the most vulnerable. When I've gone way too hard is when I am had the greatest tendency to let the shadow dominate, and I just kind of don't bring out the rest of the core and just let it kind of exist inside of me. That shadow is there. Even though Christ has rescued me, the reality is it exists. Look at the next one. The shadow cannot defeat a warrior who develops strength that is contrary to the shadow's desires. If you become a strong man in the freedom of your spirit, the shadow cannot fight against that. It becomes very powerful. Number 3. The shadow cannot defeat a warrior who seeks to achieve the next step in his manhood calling. When you begin to realize there's more for me. There's more for me to do. I have more things to accomplish in my lifetime. All of a sudden, the shadow gets knocked down because you don't want to get fooled around with taking care of those petty little dark things you do. You want to get free to accomplish what you're designed to do. Number 4, the shadow cannot defeat a warrior who offers leadership to those who struggles with their own shadows. If you're going to move forward, the shadow cannot. What does he do? He's going to fight you on every level. I actually believe that some of the stuff that my family goes through is because of some of the battles that I've chosen to engage in. And there are days when I absolutely despise watching my family get shot at because of what I'm doing. I think my friends get shot at. I think that our team of guys that work together to do what we call Knights of the 21st Century get shot at. I believe that's part of it. I believe that you're going to be a leader. It's going to happen. But he can't defeat you if shadow doesn't win, if you let all the parts of your core work effectively in that area. Look at the next one. The shadow cannot defeat a warrior who relies on assistance outside of himself, such as friends, relatives, and God, to deal with his constant opponent. You're going to have a whole bevy of things around you. Friends. You're going to have everything that you can possibly have, and obviously the most important thing is a relationship with God. Jeff Bezos, when he was finishing up his talk, his baccalaureate talk at Princeton, made these statements. I want you to listen to these statements. These are some powerful, powerful statements. I'm going to read to you about 8 or 9 of them. He's going to kind of tell us the difference between a man who chooses his shadow versus a man who chooses to be a knight. He didn't know he was talking about this, but that's what he was talking about. Will inertia be your guide, or will you follow your passions? Will the force drive you, or will you follow what you were designed to be? Will you follow dogma, or will you be original? Will you do what everybody else does? Will you be a lemming, or will you be original? This is words that a knight versus spandex male versus a shadow follower versus a knight. Will you choose a life of ease or a life of service and adventure? Guys, if that doesn't get you excited, saying that's what I want, I don't want ease, I want that, then you probably aren't moving towards knighthood. That's the key. Will you wilt under criticism, or will you follow your convictions? Whew, good stuff. Will you bluff it out when you're wrong, or will you apologize? Man, this guy could have taught this course. Gotta be careful here. He might be here next year. Will you guard your heart against rejection, or will you act, and I love this, when you fall in love? When you find that love, will you act on it? Or will you just try to protect yourself? We'll talk about armor and how we try to protect ourselves. Will you play it safe, or will you be a little bit swashbuckling? That's a term we like. When it's tough, will you give up, or will you be relentless? Will you be a cynic, or will you be a builder? These are all night statements, right? Shadow, night, shadow, night. Listen, last one. Will you be clever at the expense of others, or will you be kind? There's a statement that I absolutely love. It takes place in that movie I mentioned to you earlier in Robin Hood. I want you to think about this particular scene. What's happening is that Robin has now taken on the identity of Sir Robert Locksley, who was killed in battle. He used it to give passage sort of on a ship, and now he's been under the care of Sir Robert Locksley's father, Sir Walter Locksley. He's blind, but he knows that he's not his son. But he so needs somebody to lead his people that he embraces Robin as his son. There's this amazing scene where he says to him, I want you to know about who you are. See, Robin Longstride thought his father was a coward, but he was taken through a journey to understand that his father was a great man, not a coward at all. But Thomas Longstride was a man that made a huge difference. And he had his handprint put in concrete, his father's hand right next to Robin's little hand, when he was a child. And Robin's remembering this. And he remembers it. He remembers what his father wrote. Rise and rise again as lambs become lions. You know what that statement is that he's making to him right there? He's saying, I need you to rise up now and be who you were designed to be. And then at that moment, Sir Locksley takes Robin Longstride and embraces him as a son and says these words, go. Now when that took place, when that go comes, he says, I need you to rise and rise again. I know you've lived in the shadows. I know you feel like a failure. But in light of who your dad is, in light of who you can be, I need you to rise and rise again and let the lambs, those who have just been following away, become lions and lead. So I say to you, gentlemen, go. Go. Be a warrior. A knight of the 21st century. See you next week.